Hi everyone! Season 27 is a quite laggy season compared to what we have seen in the last years. So lag has always been an issue ever since especially Greater Rifts were introduced to the game, but this season in particular it's quite bad for various reasons. And I get a lot of questions from people about what to do about it, how can you reduce the lag. You can see this here on the screen right now. So when you pull too many monsters, for example, you just lag out the game way too much. And at least on the PC version of the game, lag is always to be avoided. As far as I know, on the console versions of the game, it's actually the reverse. So you actually try to lag as much as possible, at least to gain a competitive advantage. Not necessarily have a lot of fun, but this is kind of the meta there because you actually gain time while lagging, which is not the case here. So you basically always die when this happens, or at the very least you're going to lose a lot of time and you want to avoid this at all costs, especially in group pushing. So this is something where I can give you some pointers, but in general there are also other things you can watch out for to help alleviate the lag a little bit. So first of all, what you need to know is that obviously the game was never designed to work this way. So we just have these lags mostly as a result of density buffs over and over and over again. We have the ability to pull like 100 monsters, 200 monsters together if you want. And all this stuff didn't exist back when the engine was created, of course. So this is part of the reason. Then there's also the area damage, of course. So I guess most people know this, that area damage produces a lot of lags, and you generally try to avoid it, at least on party members where it doesn't matter. So this also contributes a lot. But in general, we just have very laggy builds this time around. So for example, here we're playing with a Hoda Barbarian, and Hoda Barbarian has very high attack speed, it has bloodshed procs. On top of it, it has the shockwave procs on top of that, and those also produce more area damage procs, etc. So it's like one of those metas where things are getting like just more laggy from all the extra hits that you do all the time. If you compare this to, for example, a Nova Necro is really chill on lags, simply because you don't have many hits. You stand there, you channel, you do like 2 Novas, all the small trash evaporates, and you're fine. So this is one of the huge contrasts here in this season. So Nova is simply not very laggy. You have barely any hits, and on the other hand, Hoda is very laggy. There are obviously even crazier lags that you can do. For example, Mundunugu Witch Doctor is also incredibly laggy in general, but it hasn't really made a cut for like meta teams anyway, but at least it was pretty close. And there was a solid chance we would play Mundunugu this season, or at least have the option to do so. So some builds simply turn out way laggier, and you should rather choose those that lag less, like the Nova Necro. I know, for example, that the wizards are also lagging out a lot, so this is even a problem in solo play. Now, lagging out in solo is something that is rather uncommon, but it does happen with rather laggy builds, and one of those is the Tarasha Wizard, and it kind of makes sense. You stack up like 50 different ground effect dots, and yeah, obviously like it's just gonna lag the hell out. So there's not really that much you can do. Besides, maybe avoiding attack speed rolls everywhere, and maybe not overpulling too much. But yeah, this is how that goes. I guess the worst offender is Crusader this season with the Arcan set, which I believe is not really pushed yet. But maybe on non-season, we have some clears here. This is one of the strongest builds. It's definitely the strongest Crusader build, and it's laggy as hell. I've already shown that in another video. And this is like the Game Terminator build this season. So this is like as bad as it gets. And funny enough, it's a build that runs 0 area damage. It's just that crazy because you produce like 2000 hits per second. So as a general rule of thumb, the more enemies you hit at the same time, and the more often you hit all of them at the same time, the worse it gets. I guess that's pretty obvious. The number of the hit, the damage value doesn't actually matter at all. For the game engine, it doesn't matter if you hit for 10 damage or if you hit for 10 trillion damage. It's the same. And even though you might think that higher numbers take longer to calculate, that's actually not really the case. So even a support player that has 1 point in area damage can lag out the entire party. So this also means that in general, as a team especially, you should try to minimize the amount of like kind of useless hits you do. Those that don't really contribute, that don't come from your trash killer, so to say. So one example is the multi-shot, or like the strafe power for the ZDH. So you can use this crucible power to shoot a lot of multi-shots everywhere automatically, but it's not needed. It's absolutely useless. So if you just, are not lazy, you can just press multi-shot manually as always, as CDHs have done it for the last 7 seasons. And you're going to be better off because you don't produce like 7 multi-shots at 100 targets every single second. Instead, you can press it once every 3 seconds and suddenly have spared the servers a lot of effort. And this can be used to calculate the other hits that are actually important. Another such example is also the gem of efficacious toxin. So I already mentioned ground effects, and this is very similar. So any kind of dot, any kind of ground effect that ticks over time and deals damage is producing a lot of hits on all targets at all the time. So this also contributes a lot, any dot, and you kind of want to try to minimize those as much as possible. So the more dots you have in your party, the worse. And this, for example, applies to when you have bleed rolls on a weapon, on a support character or something like that. You produce a dot on all targets. The toxin gem, you could actually consider just dropping one of the toxin gems in the foreman party. So usually both supports wear it, but you can have only one because only the additive bonus damage stacks. So there's 10% additive damage, and the 10% less damage done doesn't actually stack on the toxin gem. So removing one of them in a foreman party is not such a big deal. It's like a 2% damage loss or something, and you can just run another support gem or like another gem on one of the supports, like a defensive one, and you already help the team with less lags. Now, aside from removing area damage from everyone who's not a trash killer and doing some other little adjustments to your setups and playing different builds, which is easier said than done, you can also make a huge impact with just the gameplay. First of all, it matters which type of monsters you are fighting. So here's an example of the Dust Eater Hulk monster type, which is one of the least density monster types in the game. And here you can be like way more aggressive with your pulls because there's simply not that many targets. So it also kind of matters like what are you fighting? Are you fighting like hordes of little zombies and skeletons and they get all pixeled together by the support barbarian into like a little pool? And are you gonna hit like 100 targets or are you just gonna hit like 40 targets? Some monster types simply have a lot more targets than others. Some monster types spawn extra targets, like the Lacuni Face Beast monster type with the Mothers, or the God combo with the Summoners that spawn these Hellions. So there are some cases like that. And there's even certain like spawner elites, for example, Red Callers or Mega Brutes that produce more targets out of nowhere. And if those land suddenly into the middle of a pool that was just on the edge of lagging out, then yeah, you can kill the server basically. So you gotta be careful with that. So you always have to pay attention to what is the monster type, what are the elites, and also do you have, for example, illusionist elites. Illusionists are another case of like huge like lag potential. Whenever they split and you have suddenly like extra targets, it does lag way more than usual. I believe there's actually something wrong with illusionists to some degree, which might be because of this like, overlapping collision boxes or so that exist suddenly. And it just like lags more than what you would expect from having like 10 extra targets or so. But illusionist is always something to look out for. So you have to make smaller pulls when you have those elites. The same to a smaller degree applies to Health Link as well. Health Link just like updates the HP values of all the members like multiple times per second. And when you have like lots of small hits that you produce on the pull, then this can also produce lags very easily. Another huge source of lags are also knockback effects. And in Season 27 in particular, we have the Whirlwind support bar that a lot of teams use. And you just constantly knock around enemies with that. And you have like a huge ball of monsters that gets pulled with you. And this also contributes heavily. So knockback effects, despite not really producing like hit values necessarily, they're just like really taxing on the servers for some reason. And this is another thing where you can, for example, stop spinning with the whirlwind barb a little bit and just let the servers catch up a little bit. As long as the monsters are already grouped up tight enough, you don't really have a reason to spin necessarily. So you can try to do that less in like a pool that is already set up, and this might help a little bit so that the DPS can just do damage, and then you group them up again and move them over to the next pool or the Oculus Ring or something like that. In addition, you can also try to time the nukes in a way that you only stack up monsters really tightly exactly on the nuke phase. So for example, Hoda Barbarian has a convention of elements. So you try to nuke during the fire cycle and during the physical cycle of the shockwaves. Or for example, similar with the Nova Necro, you only nuke on the physical cycle every 12 seconds or every 24 seconds. So you can try to keep monsters a little bit more loosely in like a large pull, and then right before the nuke phase, you pull them together so that all the damage happens exactly in that moment when you start lagging out, and most of the small stuff disappears. So when you time this well, when you have a lot of targets, you can actually just evaporate all the small trash, and then the game will not have any issues. It will just like catch up a second later or so, and you won't lag to death. And these are pretty much all the tips I can think of right now, so I hope that helps you. At least for group play, there's a lot of things you can do. In solo, with something like Tarasha, you don't necessarily have much of a choice, it's just a laggy build. I did give some suggestions to Blizzard at various opportunities about how things could be improved as kind of like a general like change to the game, especially concerning area damage or dot effects and these kind of things. I believe there is definitely some potential here to do some like general changes that just help everyone basically. And I did it again actually very recently because of the season release, because we see that there is a lot of activity, a lot of people having problems, and yeah, maybe something will be done in the future. I mean, right now it's also the season start, so a lot of people are on the servers, so this contributes a lot to the server load. And as the season player base thins out, or for example, if you play off prime time, things are also way better, so this is very noticeable. So for example, when you play a very laggy build or very laggy meta, this is also another option. And this also concludes this video, so hope you enjoyed it, hope it helps you, and I'll see you guys next time.